Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we are a day away from the trade deadline. So we go through the latest, all the names the Bucks have been linked to, some ideas that were tossed to us by you, the listeners, and just where the Bucks currently sit and what they can do. We get you set for the trade deadline coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Fayaz of Brew Hoop as we get set for the trade deadline here and walk through all the rumors, what the Bucks can do, their cap situation, as well, an interactive show that we've got for you today. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day each and every day, and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you haven't signed up for it yet, you can do so at lockedondaily.com to get your day started with the all-new and free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Van, we had said too, I'm still kind of expecting something to happen either as we're recording this or overnight into the hours that just negates everything we go through here. But the purpose of this, we asked, look, what do you want to see the Bucks do? What's available for them to do? We've talked about it largely for the last month or so. So we're going to walk through the cap sheet for the Bucks, some of the names they've been linked to as well, what it would take to get those names into Milwaukee, what it would cost the Bucks as well. But I suppose before we dig into all of that, we've already seen a very active couple of days leading into the trade deadline here. You guys have talked about this and covered it on Brew Hoop as well, but I'm assuming you expect the Bucks to make some type of deal.
Yeah, I'm not. It would be very out of character, I think. This is what I've been saying. I'm prepared to be wrong about this. But I think it'd be pretty out of character for John Horst to trade from his rotation. Because if you look back at his tenure in Milwaukee, the only times he's made a deal at the deadline that has involved someone who is getting regular minutes were happened in 2021 and 2022. And that was DJ Augustine, who went out in the PJ Tucker trade, and then Dante DiVincenzo the following year. Otherwise, every deadline except for one, which is 2020 season, he's made a trade. But typically, he's dealing guys like Cameron Payne from last year, or I guess Serge Ibaka from the year prior.
Yeah, I think they're going to make something. It's interesting. We were talking about this earlier today, and we may have a little bit of differing opinions on what they actually do. Like, I've long maintained, look, I think they're just, if nothing else, they're just going to get under the second apron. You guys have gone through trade ideas and proposals at Brew Hoop as well, and it seems like the majority feel like not going to get under the second apron this year, but here's some moves that we think could make us better.
Yeah, I think it's best for the Bucks right now to just, throw credence to
better
or whatever, and just use what options you have to get better. They're already paying a tax bill. The projected tax bill with the roster right now is $74.8 million. So, what's another few $1 million to schmoes like us? But I think the only real downside to staying over the second apron this year is that your pick in 2032 will get frozen, and that's because, like, if you finish any season above the second apron, your draft choice, your first round pick, 7 years away, becomes untradeable. You can't include it in any deals. Now, that would happen if the Bucks finish over the second apron in June, but they can unfreeze that if they get under the second apron in 3 of the following 4 years. So between 2026 and 2029, if at least in 3 of those years they're beneath the second apron, then that pick gets unfrozen potentially as soon as 2028. And the good news is, here's our first visual. I have this Bucks apron on for all those watching. This podcast is not sponsored by Palermo's Pizza, but These were in Palermo's pizza boxes years ago. I used to have a second one, which I wish I could wear, because they're over the second apron. But I think next summer it's much more likely. Well, this summer it's much more likely they're a first apron team, because even with 10 guys on the roster, including all the non-guaranteed contracts for AJ Green, Andre Jackson Jr., and the player options for Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, they have about 28 million below that second apron next year.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of space in there. I mean, they project as they're not going to have cap room, and right now they with that salary they wouldn't be a tax-paying team, but they probably end up being a tax-paying team because they own 10 million before they get to that number. But they wouldn't have the second apron restrictions next year, most likely.
Yeah, I mean, there is a path, and you can almost see the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the Bucks' financial freedom here. But I guess let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get into some of these names here that everybody has kicked around for the Bucks. We've seen some more reporting coming out earlier today as well, and you have put together a spreadsheet for us as well where we can walk through this.
Yeah.
So maybe one you're definitely going to want to watch on YouTube if you're usually a podcast listener. But here is our look at where the Bucks are currently at. So here is their cap sheet. We're going to plug in names of, hey, if this trade happens, here's what it looks like. Where should we begin? Let's start with the one that's picked up the most steam in the last couple of days. And that is our friend Kyle Kuzma, who is reportedly linked to the Bucks, depending on where you get your sourcing, aggressively pursuing him or just kicking the tires. But we've started to hear the name Kyle Kuzma quite a bit more.
Yeah, and before getting into, his, I guess, pluses and minuses as a player, let's look at the salary first. I'm going to copy paste this over. First of all, Kuzma is making less than Chris Middleton this year. So on the one hand, that's good, because as a team that's over the first apron, the Bucks cannot they cannot acquire more salary than they're sending out.
Yeah.
Or they cannot take back more than 100% of the salary they're sending out. So Kyle Kuzma making about $23.5 million. Chris Middleton's up at 31.7. Okay, that's great from the Bucks' perspective. However, the Wizards are going to need to be in compliance with salary matching rules. They're going to need to include a little bit more salary. It's not too much, but a minimum salaried player would do it. So if it's just Chris Middleton leaving the Bucks for Kyle Kuzma, I'm not talking about the draft picks yet, but the Wizards would need to add one more player into that deal, maybe coming to the Bucks or potentially going to the third team. But let's do this right now. We're going to plug in Kuzma right there. You can see him. He takes over that third spot. Now we have to do just a couple things. Here, if you're watching, you can see that. If I scroll down here, that's their second apron figure, which I'm highlighting right now. This would put them beneath the second apron if they made this move. But again, if they were to add another minimum player onto that, it would probably, I think it would put them over the second apron. So maybe that guy goes to another team. And the other problem is, the Bucks don't have any open roster spots right now. They would have to open one. They already kind of want to open a roster spot for Ryan Rollins, right? But the other thing is we have to, there are these things here, unlikely benefits right above that. So if you take Chris Middleton's out there, we'll take his out for the next 2 years. We have to add in the ones that Kuzma has, because unlikely benefits do count towards the second apron. And he makes $3 million in unlikely benefits in each of the following 3 years of his contract, or the following 2 years of his contract. So if we're going to paste those in right there. And you can see that their apron figure went up a little bit from where Middleton's were, because Middleton's got about 2.3 million. So now they're even closer to that second apron with Kuzma there. They just have, let's see how much space, $977,000. If they make this deal, and again, they're not taking back other salary from Washington, and that salary that Washington needs to send out goes somewhere else. So that's kind of what it looks like with Kuzma. They get under the second apron, but if they want to stay under it and also get Ryan Rollins on a standard deal so he can play in the postseason or do any buyouts or anything, they would have to find their way out of more salary, and waiving anybody like DeLon Wright, Chris Livingston. Sorry, Justin.
Well,
that's not gonna that's not gonna save them money unless those guys are claimed off waivers. It would just be dead salary.
Yeah. The last part that you touched on is suddenly interesting because of some names that have popped up, and I hate to even bring this up, so we'll save it for the next segment here. I think you know the name that I'm going towards here when we talk about buyout figures, but the Kyle Kuzma one picking up steam. We've just talked about the salary. I do want to talk about the fit of Kyle Kuzma, the player in Milwaukee as well, and a few other names that have started to get some more and more mention for the Bucks, being linked to them in some way, shape, or form. We'll continue our trek towards the trade deadline coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, this next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Game Time. If you're looking for tickets for your next big event, whether it is a concert, a comedy show, sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it has never been easier. So let us tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for quite some time now, and I love it for those curated deals. It helps find the best deals, makes it even simpler. I've used it at arenas I've never been to before. You can see a panoramic view from your seat. I've used it at arenas I've been to several times before where I don't need all of those features, but I can toggle on the all-in pricing feature and see exactly what I'm going to pay with no surprise once I get to the checkout. Best part of all this is you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they will refund you 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, so there are a couple other names I want to get to. We mentioned the buyout fit as well, but just Kyle Kuzma, the player. We've only heard in all these reportings the names of Kyle Kuzma and Chris Middleton. In theory, it would, I mean, I don't want to use the word logjam because we've talked about the Bucks not really having a whole lot of depth in the front court, and certainly against the Thunder when you had zero of your three bigs, it stood out. But it would be interesting if you added Kyle Kuzma to a group that includes Giannis, Bobby Portis, and Brook Lopez. So I don't know if that would mean another move is forthcoming. Let's assume it's not. How does Kyle Kuzma, in your mind, fit on this team?
I'm a bit concerned about it because you look at his numbers this year. His shooting numbers are really bad. He's
good.
shooting about 28% from three, about 50. I think like 58% from the line, which is very out of character for him.
Giannis levels.
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I'd said yesterday in our piece at Brew Hoop. So I don't think he is an offensive upgrade over Chris Middleton. He has never been even an average three-point shooter, really. He's about 33% for his career. He's only been above 36% twice. One was way back in his rookie year.
Yeah.
The Lakers team that didn't even have LeBron yet. And while he has size, I've never really thought of him as more than just like an average defender, like decent, nothing special. It's not that he's like bad at any one thing. He's just not super quick. He's tall. He's 6'9". Like that's good size to deal with some of the bigger wings. But do I really trust him against Jason Tatum? I don't think so. So I just don't think it makes the team better this year. And I think it's worth mentioning that his contract as a descending structure, but he'd be under contract guaranteed for another 2 years after this one. So that's going to impact the Bucks' flexibility a little bit in future years. But like I said, that cap number, his salary goes down, the cap number is going way up. So I think it would be a tradable contract at some point. It's just I don't see it benefiting the Bucks this year. Yeah, he's going to be quicker than Chris Middleton. He's going to be a better defender than Chris Middleton at this point. But he's never been like a facilitator. He's not a shooter. Like, what is he adding offensively to this team right now? That's my question.
Yeah, and I mean, a better defender, sure, but defense was never, once you got further and further removed from the Lakers years, defense was never really part of Kyle Kuzma's game. It's fair to point out the numbers this year. I mean, I don't know how much I take it as, okay, there's some validity to this versus how much of, well, it's kind of a convenient excuse. But we did just hear Kyle Kuzma, a week ago, say, I'm done deferring to the young guys. Like, I want to get out of here, so I'm going to start to boost my numbers. And his numbers have gone up a little bit in the last week or so since then, but still, it is jarring when you see the numbers this year compared to some other seasons that he's put up. But yeah, I'm there as well. That, I mean, the difficulty is, part of it is the age, part of it is, as you mentioned, his salary declines each year. So it's going to cost you more in terms of assets. Like, that's what the Wizards' asking price is. And you're shaking your head. I agree. But if I'm the Bucks, it's all right. But like, look, I get the age. I get coming off the surgeries, but Chris Middleton is more of a known commodity. And if you get him healthy, not saying he's got a long runway, but you can flip him for something next year, especially this summer as an expiring contract. Like, we need something else in terms of an asset for Kyle Kuzma, and we're not giving you a draft pick for it.
And that's my worry. That, like, I mean, one of the rumors out there today was that they were including that the Wizards wanted some draft assets as well. Yeah. And I think certainly attaching the 2031 first round pick, the only one that the Bucks trade right now, that would be a big overpay for Kyle Kuzma. And even maybe that second, I mean, maybe not the second round pick in 2031, but I just don't think
that second round pick in 2031 could be.
Who knows? That could be at the top of the second
first
round.
Rounder. Right. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I say pass. But I will mention, like, just because probably people are wondering, the Bucks could not put together Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton to get up to his salary because, first of all, as you see here, he's making $23.5 million. Yeah. If you aggregate those two, first of all, if they were to put these two guys together, it's $22 million. That's not enough to take back Kyle Kuzma because the Bucks, like I said, over the first apron, can't take back more than 100% of what they're sending out. So they would need to add even more salary. However, if they were to do this, then they would get hard capped on the second apron. So after the end of that trade, the Bucks would have to be under this $188.9 million in salary, which means, like, you can't really do it. Like, you need to find another about $6.5 million, I guess, to add into this deal if you were doing Connaughton and Portis. So then it becomes like a 4 or 5 for 1 deal. Even if you're putting Marjan Beauchamp in there, it's just not practical because the Bucks would then be hard capped and they'd have only like 10 guys on the roster and need to get up to the 14-man minimum within 2 weeks. And they just probably won't have enough room to do that. It's just infeasible to do it any other way than really, I guess, Middleton and probably Brook Lopez too, because he makes just at 30. He's at 23, so he's just below. So there's that.
we don't have to necessarily dig into the financials for him because he makes slightly more than Kyle Kuzma, but just in terms of comps, and maybe not necessarily to the Bucks, but other names we've heard floated out there at that spot. Would you rather have Kyle Kuzma or John Collins?
The thing is, like, both guys are 4s. Best served as 4s. I think we've seen a lot of Collins, like especially in Atlanta, he'd play the 5. I like his shooting. I like his offense. At least what I remember of John Collins when he was on a good team. I mean, he's been all right in Utah. It's not like he's falling off a cliff or anything. I don't. Isn't he making a bit more than Kuzma though this year?
Yeah, it's about 26. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes it even that
more difficult.
That makes it a little more difficult. Like you couldn't aggregate guys. Make it even impossible to do that. But
yeah, I mean that would have to be like 3 guys going out from the Bucks.
I mean, like, yeah, if you were, it would have to be like Lopez, Portis, like, okay, there goes your front court depth, right? Or you do Middleton. But then I just don't really like the idea of a front court with Giannis, him, and one of like Lopez or Portis. So maybe if one of those guys is outgoing in the deal, you could convince me. But if it's Lopez, like, I mean, there goes your rim protection. John Collins has never been a rim protector.
Yeah, and I guess, you know what? Let's take one more break here and stick with the Jazz because we asked for trade suggestions. One of them included the Utah Jazz. A lot of what we got is not feasible, and even some of you that interacted with us said, "Look, I understand this team probably doesn't take the deal, but what about this?" So I do want to take a look at that. There's a few other names that have popped up as well. Camille and I talked about a few of them earlier in the week, but also to get back to the buyout market and that one name that feels like it's going to be looming out there that has been very polarizing for the Bucks and Bucks fans. We'll get into that conversation coming up after the break here. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is sponsored by BetterHelp. And there's some relationship green flags that we all have. We often hear about red flags, things we should avoid. But if we focused on identifying the positive signs in our relationships, those are the green flags. If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively participate and practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or just working on yourself, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy helps you develop healthy boundaries and improves your communication skills. It empowers you to set clear expectations and express your needs in relationships. Therapy provides tools for managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA and get 10% off your first month today. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right. Well, I suppose, first of all, let's just rip off the Band-Aid and mention the buyout. Hey, we talked about the Bucks could use some bigs. Number one, I've seen the name Mo Bamba floated out there a lot. He is already on the market. If you have not closely followed Mo Bamba's career for the last 2-3 years, I mean, I think we've seen all we need to know there.
Hey, I would have taken him this last week. I mean, they just needed somebody.
I would have taken him Monday afternoon, right? The other name, which occasionally pops up, is PJ Tucker, who I would assume is not going to be traded from Utah and then will be bought out. Now, we've talked about buyouts before, and, well, if you're in the second apron, it means you can't do this in the buyout market. Well, PJ Tucker's cap figure is low enough that you could sign him if he is bought out. Now, the conversation then becomes, well, what does he even have left in the tank? But there would, in theory, be some options. Another name, I know his figure is too high, but you've started to hear more and more of the Raptors have said, hey, if we can't find a trade partner, we may be inclined to just buy out Bruce Brown. He makes too much that you couldn't sign him as a buyout. But I guess I would also say, because I've seen a lot of Bucks fans say, well, just make trades to get under the second apron, and then you can sign a buyout guy, and that's how we can improve our roster. Our pick isn't frozen. We're in a good spot. Yes. Think back to the Bucks history with buyout guys. I mean, Marvin Williams was great. That's about it that I can. Yeah.
Carter was a buyout
Javon
guy.
Carter too. Okay. So 2 names that we can remember, but it's not common. Like guys for the most part are being bought out for a reason.
They're old or they're bad.
Or
So
in the case of Javon Carter, we don't know why. There was a log
yeah,
jam and
there were
for
too many
some
people
reason,
on that roster.
Yeah.
Yeah. With a buyout guy, again, Bucks would need to open a roster spot up. We'll talk about this briefly. So Ryan Rollins has what? About
I think
10,
11 so yeah.
games left on his two-way. So again, can't play in the postseason if you're on a two-way deal. So if they want him in the postseason rotation, they're going to have to open up a roster spot for him. And if you want a buyout guy, there's another roster spot. So
well, and not to mention too, not only the postseason, but like save yourself the headache
this season.
Yeah, well, and save yourself the headache this summer of dealing with restricted free agency and just we got him for the next couple of years at a cheap deal.
Exactly, they can lock him into. I've heard it called the Sam Hinkie special, where it's just a guaranteed contract for the rest of this year, and then there's some non-guaranteed team options the next couple of years. So okay, let's say the Bucks were to sign somebody later in the month on the buyout market. Let's say they're able to waive someone like DeLon Wright or Chris Livingston. They open up roster spots. I don't think those guys are going to get claimed on waivers. So that means that money is going to be on the Bucks books still. And if they want to then fill those, like it depends on the date, because even though they're minimum salaries, the minimum salary is about $2.1 million bucks this year for a veteran player. And that would apply to Rollins too, because he's in his third year.
Because it's what, like $3 million, but the league subsidizes.
Exactly. Yeah. The Bucks wouldn't be paying. They'd only be paying like up to the 3-year portion of it. Anyway, but that salary would be prorated depending on when it's signed. If it's signed with, like for example, 2 weeks after the trade deadline, let's say the 20th. I picked that date for a reason. 20th of February. You sign someone on that date, the cap hit for that guy for the rest of the season is going to be about, I believe, $624,000. So that's, again, like that's money that is going on top of your, this apron figure we have here. It's going to cost even more tax payments. But the issue would come in here. Again, if it's like the Bucks dip below 14 guys, like let's say they do make a move at the deadline where they trade out like 3 players and they only take 1 back. They'll need to get up within 2 weeks of that trade happening. They'd have 12 guys. They need to add 2 roster spots. If that trade hard caps them, they need to leave enough room. Like it would hard cap them at the second apron. So they would need to have enough room to sign 2 guys and stay under this $188.9 million figure. So you're talking about, if you need 2 guys, about 1.3 million bucks is what you would need to leave under a hard cap if that is incurred by one of your trades. So like if you're looking at trades and you're thinking, oh, hey, this will hard cap them and it gets them just under the second apron, it's like you need to leave enough room there so they can be in compliance with the 14-man rule.
It's like if you don't pay off your credit card each month, when you get the bill next month, like how am I over the balance? Like you got to factor that in. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is it March 1st that 10 days are no longer available? Because like it's not going to save you a ton, but we've seen teams do it in the past where you have that 2-week deadline. You circumvent it by riding out 10 days as long as you can before you have to finally upgrade that contract.
Yeah, the thing is, it doesn't really save you any money.
But yeah, I was going to say, even with that, it's going to take it from, if it's 600,000 to like 585,000.
Yeah, and that difference there is what you're going to pay. Like a veteran guy on like a 3-year veteran on a 10-day contract makes about $110 million or something like that. So unless the only way you'd really save money is if you were signing someone like a rookie or a second-year player, they would be like a few, like 10, 20 grand cheaper. It really, it's like you have to have that roster full anyway. Like you could try to game it, but might as well just get someone in there for the rest of the season. Yeah. you're gonna have to pay that money anyway. So you need to leave yourself a good, depending on if it's 3 guys, you need to leave if you need to fill 3 roster spots. If you get down to 11 guys, you're gonna have to give yourself about like 1.8, 1.9 million space below the hard cap if they get hard capped, of course.
Let's rapid fire through a couple more names, but let's circle back to the name we just brought up before. If he's open to joining the Bucks on the buyout market and you're in the spot where, we need another big, do you take PJ Tucker at this point?
What is he, 39?
39, I believe.
He has not played
hasn't played
NBA basketball game since last May, the first round of the playoffs.
Yep.
I just don't think he has anything to offer you at this point. I would
39 and will, depending on how deep you go, potentially be turning 40 in the playoffs.
That's true. Yeah, he would be low on my list of options for a bigger guy, and he's like at this age, do you really trust him to play bigger forwards or like the type of guys he was playing in 2021 when he was, I guess, 4 years younger? Yeah, I don't trust him to do that at this point. But he's got 6 fouls,
and he's been a 15 minutes per game guy for the last 2 years, which
but then he became a 0 minute a game guy last year.
At this point, it's probably closer to 10. So look, I know the name is going to get brought up a lot. It's very polarizing. I think I'm with you too. I appreciate what you brought to us in 2021, PJ.
Love the guy.
You're 39 years old, and we've talked about this team getting younger and more athletic, and you don't fit the bill there. The other names that we've kicked around quite a bit. So Zach LaVine was tied to the Bucks. We've heard Casey Johnson even say, look, the Bucks and Bulls were engaged in those conversations up until the last minute. And the Bulls just opted to become a part of that 3-way deal where they get their own pick back. I would assume the 2031 pick was having to be included in that trade.
Probably.
And look,
he essentially got a lottery pick,
I mean, and that's, I've talked about it before too, not necessarily Zach LaVine directly.
Not someone I would give up that pick for personally.
But it's like that type of move where I would not be married to the 2031 pick, where it's a player that's still young enough and has a couple of years on their deal that you feel like, okay, we can extend this a little bit more with this player in Giannis and continue to develop our young guys. But some of the other moves we've heard and names like a Kyle Kuzma deal, that's not what I'm including my 2031 first round draft pick for. All right, our conversation with Van went extremely long, so we're going to break it off into a part 2. Look for that momentarily here, where we get into what should the Bucks do with the 2031 first round pick and some other trade options that are out there for them, some other targets potentially on the buyout market. So we'll break all that down and more on part number 2 of the trade deadline primer. For Van, I'm Justin, and we will talk with you guys once again on Locked On Bucks.